He takes full advantage of it like you wouldn't believe, Jon told Arya. The number of times he's tried to kick me out of Winterfell, it's astonishing. And you, directed to Sansa, let him, all the time. He's seen almost 30 named days. The funniest part, Sansa commented, is that you think I'm blind to it. If you're not, then why do you let him just... Because, she said, leaning forward, you get so entirely worked up about it. Arya jackknifed upright. No, she said loud and sharp. Nope, you're not kissing in front of me. Go away. Didn't Sansa tell you that Roderick was looking for you, Jon? Shoo, now. Jon pulled away and made a face at Arya. Arya simply crossed her arms over her chest and glared until he started walking. Once he'd gone, Arya frowned. She had to change the topic quickly, or else Sansa'd get even more intrusive than she usually was. I've been meaning to ask you. Arya hesitated for a moment, then continued. Last I heard, Alice and Wyla were serving on your council, but now nobody seems to know where they actually are. I told them to leave, Sansa replied. Arya went dangerously still, and Sansa arched an eyebrow. Don't act coy, it doesn't suit you. Both of them loved you, Arya said heatedly. They were... fools, Sansa finished archly. Madly in love with each other, still refusing to do anything about it. The looks alone were enough to drive anyone mad. I mean, Jon commented on it, and he never notices anything. Arya looked at her incredulously. You knew? It started in King's Landing. Of course I knew. Arya, what do you take me for? A half-blind fool? I'm not sure you've the right to tell anyone that they're being inappropriate, Arya grumbled back, relaxing slightly. You are the person who chased our elder brother out of his own seat just because you couldn't keep your hands off of your husband. Jon isn't any less invested in the whole touching business, Sansa announced, and Arya's hands shot up to cover her ears. I don't want to know. Are you sure? Sansa asked, laughing slightly. No wildling man to share your furs, Arya? No vows said before the heart trees? I'd be happy to give you tips. Shut up. All right, Sansa sighed. Anyhow, both Alice and Wyla refused to start anything so long as they were on my council, so I sent them away. Both were adamant that they wouldn't have any scandals clouding my rule, which is a sweet sentiment, albeit an unneeded one, and so when I told them to leave, they started a band of outriders that answered to me. See what problems are in different keeps, and send the ravens. A spy service, Arya said. Impressive. Particularly because it all but landed in my lap full grown, Sansa said, and offered Arya a hand, pulled her up. We should head back. It's getting dark. On the way, Arya turned to her. They are happy, though? Disgustingly so, Sansa answered. There was a flare of happiness in Arya's gut, and she sighed at it. Less than a week in Winterfell, and she was becoming a homebody. But for all that she couldn't find happiness here, for all that she loved the fury of a good fight and the bite of the wind across her cheeks, for all that Arya couldn't stand still, she knew Sansa was different. She and Sansa had settled their differences ages ago, and she was happy now. What she did mattered was something none other could do, and for all her complaints, she could think of no other life she'd rather live. I'll see what I can do. Wyla, Alice called, panting as they stumbled to the top of another hill. Wyla was already heading for the next, higher one, stubbornly limping her way forward. The wind caught her green hair, pulling at it until it was whip taut, brilliant as a Tyrell banner. She turned to look at Alice, and the sun rays spilled over her face, painting her cheeks a molten gold. Alice stumbled, slightly, struck dumb. There was something to be said for this life, thought Alice. They'd spent such long years serving Sansa on her council, dancing around something made entirely of shadowed glances and quick smiles, something that neither had words for. and then they'd been given a chance to do something more. The world wouldn't remember Wyla Manderly or Alice Karstark. They gave that dream up when they left Sansa's council. But that didn't mean that they couldn't make their world better, and that was what they did. A sword strapped to their hips, a smile strapped to their lips, a warm hand outstretched, a quiet, sincere offer of help to those who had no one else to turn to. Alice gasped her way over to Wyla. "You look beautiful," Wyla murmured, reaching up to whisper in Alice's ear. Alice knew she was flushed, skin a blotchy red, hair half out of her braid, but they had a policy of not lying to each other. She tipped her head to the side. "I was thinking the same," she replied, hand reaching out and tangling in Wyla's hair. They'd spent overlong in the wild. The roots were growing in, a brown deep as fresh-tilled soil. "Like a golden rose." Wyla's lips curved in a faint smile. "If I'm a rose, you're a... thorn?" "Storm," Wyla finished firmly. Then grinning, "All beautiful and deadly, and bringing water to let me bloom." Alice grinned back, nudging Wyla with her shoulder. They had to reach the Flint's hometown before sundown to meet a girl who'd sent them a raven telling of a lord who'd left her sister with a babe in her belly and run off. And they yet had a ways to go. "Well," said Alice, wrapping Wyla's hair in one fist, stepping forwards and pressing a sharp kiss to her lips, "Gods know that I'll always want to watch you bloom." They turned and set off, into the stony mountains, and Alice was sure that she'd never know a way to be happier than this. Oberyn went missing for 4 years. Doran wished he could say he was surprised when his brother resurfaced all those years later, head nearly split open and in heavier clothes than ever before, but he hadn't been. Until Doran saw Oberyn's body, saw him dead under his fingers, Doran would always think him alive. After all, Oberyn always had a nasty habit of being cocky beyond all belief, with the skill to back up just over a half of his boasting, and it was always enough to get him out of the incredible mess he often found himself in. But Oberyn returned to Doran's court, and he returned empty-handed. It was weeks later that he confessed to killing Gregor Clegane, a month later that he confessed to spending 2 years learning to make wine, a year later that he confessed to visiting the Isle of Faces and seriously considering switching from the faith. Doran watched Oberyn relearn the ways and customs of Dorne, watched his younger brother treat with his daughters in a gentler manner than ever before, and he realized that for the first time in decades, Oberyn didn't carry the blazing need for Aaliyah's justice that he once had. In all the years to come, Doran would never put pen to paper. He'd find himself sometimes staring at the ravens that were trained to go to Winterfell, but he never reached for one. And yet, he penned the letters in his mind. He knew exactly what he would tell Sansa Stark, were he to ever see her again. "You have returned my brother to me. You have given him justice. You have given my sister, a woman 20 years perished, justice. There is no higher kindness, my lady. All of Dorne is grateful to you." Edmure, for all that his men named him an inveterate bachelor, knew what it was to be in love. Once, after years of cajoling and escaping in quiet, furtive kisses, Edmure had loved a man. And he'd left him in King's Landing as a sign of his respect for Mark, as a sign of his confidence in Mark. And then Daenerys Targaryen had come and burned King's Landing to the ground, killing Mark along with thousands of innocent lives. Edmure took his vengeance as honorably as he knew how. No dragons would ever come to Westeros again. But this did not mend his heart, did it? Perhaps one day, Edmure would be able to take a wife. Until then, he had a sister to care for in Riverrun, half mad and despairing. He had a kingdom to care for and nourish. He had a dignity to uphold. And so he carried on as he always did, dutifully, honorably, steadily. Adara handed a cup of wine over to Theon and sank into a seat next to his. "Your sister's coming here?" "She wants to," said Theon. Though she might be too busy, but Asha tends to do what she wants, so she's most likely coming. They'd been married for almost 10 years now. Adara had watched him march off to battle, unknowing of how she felt. She'd watched him return, bleeding and almost dead. The first morning he'd gotten out of bed and started walking, she'd kissed him silly. They were 10 years married, and Adara had learned her husband well. She could see the quiet, exhausted resentment in the corners of his eyes, the downturned edges of his lips. She could see the careful respect he'd fostered for his sister, and the fragility with which it could topple. Everyone's always loved her more, he'd said once, tongue loose with wine. Ask her to bring your mother as well, Adara said quietly, and watched his eyes light with the idea. I'll always be beside you, love. She smiled, soft and gentle, because Theon listened to her. He didn't see her quiet nature and name it weakness. Adara loved him for it. Tyrion spent years rebuilding the Westerlands. He spent even longer rebuilding his family, but that's another story. When Jaime first challenged him to a duel, actually strong enough to demand something of someone, Tyrion laughed at his brother. Then he shut himself up in his solar and continued to laugh, right up until he tasted salt down his cheeks. Mira was tired. Down to the marrows of her bones. No, deeper. Jojen had survived the war against the others, and yet in their home, he wasted away. Greywater Watch left his skin sallow, his hands shaking. He spent his nights screaming and his days sullen. Mira had begged him to leave. There was no call to remain in the Neck. Sansa would surely give them refuge if they were to even hint at it. But Jojen refused. I will die here, he announced, and Mira snarled back. Why? Because, he said, this is my home, and I have been gone from it long enough. 'Tis not sadness that kills me, Mira. It is your green sight, Mira said flatly. The old gods give, said Jojen simply. The old gods take. There are no reasons for it. Perhaps I should have died of the Greywater fever all those years ago. And so it went, for years on end. Mira cajoled and wept and screamed, and still Jojen did not budge. He watched her with those all-seeing eyes, grim and knowing, and Mira wondered if she'd ever known a man so selfish. Decades later, she buried her father and took up the mantle of Lady of the Neck, and still Jojen hung on to life, paler and weaker by the moment, alive by only fraying strands. I survive, thought Mira, on the coldest mornings, when her spear felt fused to her palms, when tears felt stuck in her throat. I survive, even when none else do. The battle at Last Hearth, their travel beyond the wall, their return. Mira buried friends she loved, family she adored, enemies she loathed. It was what she did, this black-haired swamp girl. She was tired and angry and bitter, but she had a castle to see to. She had a duty to serve, and Mira, for all her laughter, always did her duty. I survive, she thought, and walked back inside. Robert Arryn met his mother when he turned 16. There was something pitiable in her thin, lanky strands, he thought, a reminder of what was once beautiful and was not gone to rot. Traitor, Bronze Yon named her, for killing Robert's father. Once, deep in his cups, he'd even spat, whore. But Robert knew what it did to people, to be told to love only those your parents ordered you to love. Maybe he'd inherited his mother's heart along with her eyes. Maybe others would name that a weakness. Only a few months previous, Bronze Yon had sat him down and told him what happened to women who had children out of wedlock after he saw Robert kissing a maid behind the kitchens. If no one had told his mother that, if she'd fallen in love, Robert could see his own future written out in his mother's eyes. He could see himself becoming her. My poor boy, she whispered, toddling forward and wrapping pale arms around him. Robert could see Bronzion's distaste. He could feel his own pity. But he was a man grown now. He inhaled, hugging her tighter, this woman he could scarcely remember, and he said, "I've missed you, Mother." Robb loved his kingdom. That was the long and short of it. Robb loved the North. Loved it with a weight that left little space, and that smallest of spaces was taken up by his family. From where was he supposed to find the space in his heart to love a woman? He might have done it had it been necessary. Might have wedded a woman to gain an heir for the North. But it wasn't necessary, was it? Marjorie had other lovers when Asha was gone, just as she knew Asha did as well. And yet, there was a day, summer mad and wine drunk, when Marjorie fashioned a crown of salt and seaweed. She placed it on her heavy brown curls. Asha went pale, and then flushed with desire. This wasn't quite love, perhaps, but it was something close enough to it that there was no other name. Marjorie once might have wanted more, but age had taught her temperance. When she kissed Asha, she tasted salt across her tongue, and Marjorie knew. Salt was not only the taste of tears, it was the taste of freedom. Shireen married Edric Dane, and a sept she'd rebuilt with blue and green glass. It was on that altar, before a young man who was lovelier than any star, that she first felt beautiful. It wasn't the last. Robb had yet to choose a consort. There wasn't pressure on him now, insofar as there was for any king. Sansa had 3 children after all, and they'd need crowns someday. But Arya would rule over the wildlings, and she'd choose her own heirs. Bran would choose a greenseer to bear his weirwood crown after he died. Rickon was as likely to actually pay attention to the minutiae of administration as he was to paint himself bright blue and dance upside down. That left Sansa and Robb, and it always boiled down to the 2 of them, didn't it? The eldest. The ones with Tully looks and Stark hearts, and a deep-rooted protectiveness that was what they built themselves around. The proud heirs of a kingdom they forged through peace. Sansa knew, in her bones, who she'd name her heir. Bran had, years ago, spoken to her about Alysanne's dreams. When she came of age, she'd likely spend time with Bran in Greywater Watch, learning the gifts she'd been born into. But even if she hadn't had that, Alysanne had always been wild with her freedom, and queens, the inheritors of Sansa's silver crown, would always have to hold fast against storms. They would have to be the rooted trees, the steadiest hands. When darkness fell, they would have to bear the torch. And that would always be Jocelyn, who wielded kindness as easily as if it were a sword, both a weapon and a shield. She wept easily, but Sansa knew herself well enough to know that softness was no measure of steel. Her daughter was her heir. Robb, then, would likely take Beren, though that was no true measure of anything. Perhaps Arya would wish for an heir, or perhaps Robb would wed. There was still a long time before her children had to choose their paths, and for all that Sansa might plan, in the end it would be their choice, as Sansa's had been, all those years ago. And yet, they weren't getting younger. Any of them. Sansa could feel her bones creak as they never had before. When the snows fell, she felt the chill take up residence in her marrow, sink into the gaps between her ribs. There were lines on her face that she'd never before seen, and faint streaks of gray in hair that had only ever been a bright red. But these were good changes, Sansa decided. These were the best changes. The kind that meant you were alive, and you'd been shaped by the world. That you'd shape the world in return. There'd been a few years, in the beginning, when their children had died in her womb. Sansa had buried them when she could, and wept, every night, misery clawing up her throat. For a time, she and Jon stopped trying. Anne had been a glorious surprise, the girl who seemingly had 3 children's brightness in her. And after her came Jocelyn, and after Jocelyn came Beren. With them came the strength to rebuild Wintertown. With them came new life. When Sansa named her children, she gave them good, honorable Stark names. She refused to name them after any dead relative, however. They would never carry the sins of their ancestors. Let them write their own stories onto their skins. Sansa wouldn't gift them with that weight. There was another life Sansa had once lived, but it felt like a dream now, distant as only the worst nightmares could be. There was another life, one that she barely remembered. There was another life, and it didn't matter at all to this one. Every morning, she kissed Jon awake and braided a crown of direwolves and dragons and doves into her hair. She ate breakfast with 3 children who adored her. She spent her evenings reading letters from her parents and brothers, her nights in bed with a loving husband. "We Starks don't turn our faces," thought Sansa, back straight, head high, chin up. "We will see the injustice of the world. We will root it out, inch by inch, moment after moment, steadily, unerringly. We Starks don't turn our faces, and we do not hold our tongues, and we do not sit silently, and we will survive everything you think to throw at us. We will endure, as we always have."